Patrick Boyle recently put out a video explaining why the Trump-Xi summit that just wrapped up in Beijing was doomed to fail. And if you look at the world purely through the lens of 20th century Western accounting rules, his breakdown of trade imbalances is spot on. He uses Michael Pettis' theory to argue that China is trapped, producing more than it can consume and relying on the US to be the consumer of last resort. But here's the problem with that analysis. It assumes China wants to play by Bretton Woods rules forever. Western analysts don't know how to model a world where China is aggressively hoarding gold to back their own financial rails, so they simply use expired frameworks. If you look at the shadows, from CIPS to Eastern settled energy flows, a very different strategy emerges. China isn't trapped. They're simply borrowing a century-old playbook. Boyle points out that a country can't run trade surpluses indefinitely without blowing up its own economy, because eventually the customers go broke. What this misses is that China looks exactly like the United States in the 1930s and 40s. Back then, the US used its overwhelming manufacturing dominance to secure the dollar's world reserve currency status. Western analysts keep talking about alternative financial devices as if they're some sort of distant future threat. They are not. CIPS, Enbridge, and BRICS other settlement rails are already taking a massive share of the board. If you look at the data, alternative settlement volume has surged from barely 1% a decade ago to an estimated 12% of global trade before the start of Operation Epic Fury. That is not a pilot program. It is trillions of dollars actively bypassing traditional dollar chokeholds right now. Beijing isn't just mindlessly dumping goods while trapped in a dollar paradigm. They are actively pivoting to this parallel infrastructure. By capturing a massive share of world reserve currency status, these non-dollar devices will be used to give Chinese consumers a massive boost, keeping factory flows healthy without relying on Washington to hold the bag. Whether China oversteps and triggers the next debt cycle remains to be seen, but their cohesive strategy is designed to hold the torch for a Roman epoch. The video also claims that U.S. military positioning in the Middle East is a massive pressure point for Xi Jinping because China imports roughly 40% of its oil through the Strait of Hormuz. That would be true if China was still relying entirely on standard dollar-settled global markets. But that completely ignores the reality of global energy logistics right now. China is securing cheap shadow oil from Tehran at record rates. By locking in massive off-the-books energy flows from sanctioned nations, they are simultaneously insulating their supply chains from U.S. naval choke points and settling the trades entirely outside the dollar. It's a de-dollarized energy hedge hiding in plain sight. Then there's Europe. The standard Western take is that by flooding the EU with cheap electronics and electric vehicles, China is going to force Europe into a retaliatory trade war. But this misreads the board. This is global realpolitik. China doesn't want to destroy European industry. They want Europe as a long-term, integrated partner. By making European green tech and manufacturing deeply dependent on Chinese supply chains and critical minerals, Beijing creates a gravitational pull. The endgame isn't a trade war. It's Eurasian integration, pulling Europe slowly eastward while leaving Washington alone on the other side of the world. I was watching the latest video from the China Observer channel, and she made a claim that perfectly captures this Western blind spot. She argued that while U.S. supply chains might suffer in a decoupling, China is the one that's going to face a massive financial crisis. Here's the reality check. Finances can be abstracted away infinitely easier than a missing supply chain. Debt is just a ledger. A sovereign state can print money, restructure liabilities, and change the accounting rules overnight. You cannot abstract away physical reality. If you don't have the factories, the critical minerals, or the heavy logistics, no amount of financial engineering is going to save you. Ultimately, China wins by playing the long game. They don't want a sudden global collapse. They just want to own the board. The strategy is to project American power just long enough for Washington to believe it. Let the U.S. exhaust itself by printing trillion-dollar deficits to act as the consumer of last resort, staring at spreadsheets while the physical supply chains are hollowed out. By the time Washington wakes up with a hangover and realizes you can't eat or shoot a financial ledger, the physical infrastructure of the next global order will already be quietly humming. This has been Earthling News, May 17th, 2026.
Trading the futures for what isn't real.